Hi, I'm Cara Lesser, founder and CEO of Kid Museum. In our first Kid Museum Futurist interview, we brought together two thought-provoking leaders in education, Dr. Shanika Hope, Director of Education Outreach at Google and Kid Museum board member, and Gregg Behr, Executive Director of the Grable Foundation, founder and co-chair of Remake Learning, and co-author of When You Wonder, You're Learning. Together, they talked about the opportunities before us to reimagine and remake learning at this critical time for kids and families. In this segment, Shanika and Gregg will share creative ideas on how we can help close the gaps in education, especially as we address unfinished learning as a result of the pandemic. They'll also touch on how we can rekindle joy in learning among students. Working now to bring joy back into learning and to close learning gaps will help us continue to build a strong, diverse, prepared workforce for the future. We hope you'll find fresh perspectives in this conversation around remaking learning and new ideas for how we can move forward.
Through the pandemic, we have seen that not all students have had the supports and have had the learning experiences that have allowed them to rise to the occasion of this challenge that we all find ourselves in. And we're not able to really develop new skills in communication or collaboration or creativity and or even compassion. And so are there any other specific kind of lessons learned from this past year that teachers should consider as they step into this new year and as we emerge out of the pandemic?
I think we begin with grace. Grace to recognize that we all are struggling to get through this time. And as adults, all of us are working to bring our kids through this time, whether as teachers, as parents, as directors of museums alike. So one is to give ourselves grace. Two is to recognize that, in fact, all sorts of learning has been happening, right? We might not measure it according to our standardized tests or traditional metrics, but there probably is all sorts of learning that has been happening. Third is to squarely recognize the trauma, the stress, the challenges, the inequality that the pandemic has shone a bright light on. We need to notice that, acknowledge it, wrestle with it. And fourth, I think as we go into the summertime and the fall, we need to think about how we create loving spaces, right? How do we start with love? When we think about new approaches to learning, we also need to think about what is timeless and classic. And what's timeless and classic in learning is the role of deep and caring relationships. What I admire so much about the educators that I get to support, interact with, advocate for, they really start from a place of love. And imagine my classroom, my library, my museum. How do I create a space where kids feel like they belong, where their questions are going to be respected, when we support them in brilliant ways? And fifth, I would say, Dr. Hope, is in the midst of some real trauma and tragedy and awfulness during these past 16 months, there are also some remarkable bright spots. I look at bright spots of community learning hubs right here in my own community, where out-of-school time organizations and museums and libraries work together to create brand new learning spaces that were very much designed, focused on matters of potential inequity, right? To address that inequity right from the very beginning. And what community learning hubs might look like. What is that a signal of as we look forward? I look at what some schools have done to reimagine what they've done, not only with the obvious things like technology-enhanced learning, but also the way they've reimagined schedules, the ways in which they have rethought detention as tutoring times, the ways in which they've rethought how they conduct their specials and think of them as intensive, the ways they've created time for genius hours or period X, or places where teachers and kids alike can pursue some passions and interests in addition to math and English and language arts and other things. So I would say start with hope, start with love. Let's really focus on creating settings where kids feel like they're belonging and they're respected, and really turn to some of the bright spots that I think are real signals about a potential renaissance of wonder and a renaissance of learning in schools, museums, libraries, and in this learning landscape that we get to create for our kids and families and educators.
Thank you. I love that. I'm curious if you were speaking to policymakers and or potential supporters of this work, maybe to stand it up in a new city or to help a new district bring it online. What would you tell them as to why now? Why is it so important for us right now to reimagine learning and to find ways to help students, teachers, and education to rebuild?
The pandemic, I think, has engaged us like never before, right? So I think about my own role, which is a dangerous thing to think of just yourself, but right, each of us as parents and families has a new window into what happens not only in our schools, but in the other sites of learning throughout our community. And we've really leaned in as parents and families into a virtual setting, now increasingly in person, but really seeing what's happening in our learning settings in our communities. I think our schools themselves have gotten a new window into our families, into what's happening in our kids' families. They've themselves have built up a different understanding and a different empathy. So it's a matter of capturing the empathy that families and parents and caregivers have built up for educators writ large, capturing the empathy that educators have built for a new understanding and appreciation for what it is that their young people and families are experiencing, and really giving something for all of us to rally around. And what we can rally around is hope and joy and maker-centered learning and technology-enhanced learning and STEM learning and these things that bring hope and joy, and we can clearly see light up our kids. How do we deepen our investment in that in a just-based way, right? To really light up our regions as learning campuses. Why on earth wouldn't we want that for our kids and our families and educators right now? And it feels like if we don't do this, if we don't capture that at this moment, I'm not sure we're ever going to. We have the greatest opportunity in a generation, especially with the once in a generation flow of public dollars to support our learning settings. We have a once in a generation opportunity to reimagine what learning looks like across America for every single one of our kids.
Hear, hear. I definitely would echo the point that, look, the pandemic has really opened our eyes in a number of ways specific to public education. And the opportunity, the importance, but also the places where things are splintered, and also the importance of having multiple ways for us to reach the whole child as part of the learning. And when you look at a lot of the research that's already telling us what learning loss looks like, not just here in the U.S., but quite frankly globally, as districts had to pivot to online learning, I think more and more, as a result of that experience, maker learning is an opportune time and initiative for schools to revisit to meet the whole needs of the child, for sure.
If we get those things right, we'll get the other things right. I agree with you.
Hear, hear. Perfect. Thank you, Gregg.